The long-awaited agreement between the U.S. and Iran is now in effect. The 14-point Memorandum of Understanding will begin 60 days of negotiations between Washington and Tehran to achieve a final deal. For more on this, let's join Cyril Vanier in Burgenstock, Switzerland, where the U.S. and Iran are due to meet on Friday. Hey, Cyril.
Yeah, Scott, it's great to be with you as we bring our viewers continued and extensive coverage of the negotiations that are beginning to take place between the U.S., Iran, and regional partners. So it's all going to happen on the Bergenstock resort, which, if you look at the rocky ridge on the top of the mountain behind me, that is an exclusive resort that has on occasion been used for moments like this. High-stakes talks, exclusive negotiations, heads of states as well as technical teams. It is no understatement to say that the future of the Middle East will be, at least in part, decided by discussions that will be taking place here at the top of the mountain here in central Switzerland. So that's where things stand for now, and we're going to break everything down with our correspondents. Joining us now, we are live, of course, in Switzerland. Al Jazeera's Javaid is at the Bergenstock resort, or at least as close as he can get to it as we speak. He was there a little earlier today. Osama will be joining us very shortly. James Bays, our diplomatic editor, is with me here. He has extensive experience of these diplomatic talks. Will be bringing us his expertise. We'll also be live from the White House. U.S. Chief Correspondent Alan Fisher is there. And we are monitoring developments very closely from the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera's Tohid Asadi is in Bandar Abbas on Iran's southern coast. So that's how we're going to kick things off. Now, I do want to bring in Osama bin Javaid. Osama, we believe at this point some 24 hours away, removed from these discussions. You are at the Bergenstock resort where they're expected to happen. What can you tell us?
Well, a couple of hours earlier, we were inside the resort and we met some of the delegations who've started arriving, the Americans here, the Qataris here. There is some representation of the Swiss, who are the facilitators, but we're still waiting for the Iranians to arrive. The Pakistanis are on the way as well. It is going to be high-stakes diplomacy here in Switzerland. On my right shoulder, you can actually see the resort, the main building where these talks are going to be held. It's an interesting venue, as you mentioned, secrecy, away from the prying eyes of the public, owned by the Qataris. It's not the first time this is being used for high-stakes diplomacy. It's also been used earlier for Russia-Ukraine talks as well. So it is a place where people can mingle freely. They'd be able to talk to each other. As we've seen this way of diplomacy before, the Qataris have been holding multiple rounds of talks with various parties. We've seen that in Qatar as well, when they held the talks between the Americans and the Afghan Taliban, and then intra-Afghan talks where the Taliban and the then Afghan government were there as well. So they're used to this. They've now championed this, and they're going to be in the driving seat to take things forward. Earlier in the day, we saw after the signing by the Americans and the Iranians, this morning it was also signed by the Pakistani Prime Minister as well, who is part of the mediating team. So there's a lot to thrash out here. There's a 60-day window in which they'll have to figure out what to do with the Strait of Hormuz, how to make sure that Iran complies with the nuclear program, that whatever agreement they come up with, how will those $300 billion in funds they're going to be released, and much more. And this 60-day period is also extendable if both sides agree.
James, I beg your pardon, Osama, you're staying with us. I'll come back to you in a moment. James Bays, our diplomatic editor, is with us. James, you've actually covered negotiations that have taken place at the Bergenstock resort before. They've been used pretty much in this capacity only a couple of years ago and a few times over the last decades. This is ideal for this kind of venue.
Yeah, I was up there 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. There was a big meeting on peace in Ukraine with Ukraine's supporter nations. But they've also used it back in just 2002 when Sudan was one country and they were negotiating between the people who wanted to be South Sudan. They had negotiations there. They also had Cyprus negotiations. One of the advantages is its location. It's on the top of the mountain. So that gives you security. It also gives you the ability to control access, because I've covered quite a lot of diplomatic events over the years in Switzerland, and the Swiss have been doing diplomacy for years, but diplomacy with the prying eyes of the media and 24/7 coverage is slightly different. I remember early talks on Iran, for example, in 2013. They were in the Intercontinental Hotel in the centre of Geneva. Well, guess what us reporters did? We sat in the coffee shop all day long buying coffees so we could bother people as they were coming in to try and find out what's going on. Here, that's not happening. They're only going to let the press in that they want to have in the area. And the security is important because we don't know who the delegations are, but clearly it's been widely flagged. One of those who might be attending is the US Vice President, J.D. Vance. And the security for him, you'd think he's the Vice President, not the President, but it's pretty similar.
By the way, Donald Trump hasn't even ruled out. We don't expect him at this point, but he hasn't actually ruled out attending himself. Osama bin Javaid, back to you. Do you know who is going to be leading the delegations for each side, and even when they might arrive, when they're expected?
Well, we're expecting arrivals later tonight or early tomorrow morning. I've been speaking to various delegates in various capitals. I've been told that we are expecting the Qatari Prime Minister to be here from Qatar, the Pakistani Prime Minister and his entourage to be here from Islamabad. We're expecting, as James just mentioned, J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, and on the Iranian side, the top negotiator Bakr Ghalibaf, alongside the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. But it is all things that we've spoken to sources who've said that might be happening. We still do not have confirmation of their arrivals and times, but it appears that the stage is set. I've been here in the last few hours looking at security. There was a few minutes ago a helicopter doing a sweep of the area up and down these mountain roads. We are seeing military police from the Swiss government doing the round. So it appears that high stakes diplomacy requires high level security, and that is what is being provided. And that is why it is going to be interesting to see who actually makes it, how do these talks commence, and what happens on the day after. Remember, this is not just a ceremonial signing ceremony, because the documents have already been signed on Sunday between the Vice President, US Vice President and Bakr Ghalibaf, and just last night between the US and the Iranian President. So it's not just a ceremony, it is the official kickoff of the 59 days remaining now for these sides to come to a conclusion, because this is a memorandum of understanding which needs to translate into a deal with all sides agreeing to it and abiding by it, which is not just between the United States and Iran, and also includes regional players, including the Gulf, which felt left out during the JCPOA talks.
James Bays, Osama just pointed out that there are 59 days left to reach a final settlement. Now, yes, this could be extended, but the point is that we're already at the beginning of what is supposed to be a 60-day period of talks. Do we know, or can we make any educated guesses about the process of these talks, about who's going to be talking to who and how it'll work?
An extendable 60 days, I would suspect, is how it's going to work, because the chances of getting these talks...
This is not wrapped up within 2 months?
Well, they will put a timetable on it, but they do not, I think, probably think that they will necessarily achieve that because of the sort of issues we're dealing with. These are very, very technical issues. So almost certainly there'll be two tracks. There'll be the big players who meet from time to time, and I don't think you're going to get J.D. Vance coming here every single time, but you will probably get Steve Witkoff and others who are coming here from the US. But it's interesting, last time there were long nuclear negotiations involving the US. Yes, they had all of these people who were diplomats, the Department of State, but they also had lots of people at the Department of Energy, the nuclear part of this. You need experts. We are literally not only dealing with diplomacy, we're also dealing with nuclear physics here.
James Bays, Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor, thank you very much. Osama bin Javaid at the Burgenstock Resort, thanks to you as well. So what are we talking about here in terms of the contents of the deal? The final deal, as we've explained, doesn't yet exist. That is the whole point of these next 2 months. However, a pre-deal, or what's officially known and referred to as a Memorandum of Understanding, that already exists. And there's quite a bit in this MoU, as it's often referred to. Let's look at this. The US, Iran, and their allies have to stop military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon. The US and regional partners will develop a $300 billion fund for the reconstruction and economic development of Iran. All US sanctions imposed on Iran may be removed as part of the final deal, And Iranian financial assets will be unfrozen. That is something that should be happening now under the terms of this MoU. Also, under the terms of the MoU, the Strait of Hormuz will reopen to all commercial vessels. We'll go and check what's happening in Hormuz in just a moment. The U.S. will end its naval blockade on Iranian ports. That is supposed to have begun. And Iran agrees that it will not build or buy or procure nuclear weapons. Both sides have also agreed to resolve the disposal of highly enriched uranium. So, as I said, quite a bit that's already in this pre-deal. But how does each side, how do the U.S. and Iran intend to guarantee compliance with the 14 points in this MoU? Well, Iran would like all of this to be monitored and then enshrined in international law in a binding UN Security Council resolution. The U.S. has a very different approach in mind. Listen to the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
The President has pointed out that we will be prepared to recommence if, underneath the timeline of these talks, Iran does not do what it says it's going to do, which is give up nuclear weapons, give up nuclear ambitions, give away their nuclear material, close nuclear facilities, then the War Department is here and prepared to restart if we need to. We'd prefer not to, but we are prepared and postured to.
Al Jazeera's chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher is at the White House. Al Jazeera's Tohid Asadi is monitoring developments in and around the Strait of Hormuz. He's in Bandar Abbas, as we said. That's Iran's south coast. Alan, starting with you, how can the U.S. actually ensure compliance, ensure that Iran will hold up its end of the bargain?
Well, the intention from the United States, according to the Memorandum of Understanding, is to do what the Iranians want to do, which is take this to the United Nations, and then it would be enshrined in a resolution there. But you've heard from Donald Trump. He mentioned it when he was in France on Wednesday, that he will rain bombs down on Iran's head if he doesn't think they're serious in talks. And that's just been reiterated by Pete Hegseth. So there is this uncertainty hanging around the talks. And certainly, Tohid may explain this better from Iran, but the Iranians have been worried that twice they've been involved in negotiations with the United States recently, and twice the United States has taken military action. They will be preparing for that option. But clearly, it's not off the table from Donald Trump. He would like to see a deal. He's keen to do a deal. He says the Iranians are keen to do a deal, and it took long enough to draw up the Memorandum of Understanding. And certainly Trump supporters here in the United States believe that it's a start to get a deal. It will take 60 days of talks. What is interesting is that Donald Trump's public schedule has just been released for today. There's no sign that he's going to be heading back to Europe so quickly. But what we will hear from, who we will hear from, is J.D. Vance, the Vice President. He will be in the briefing room in a couple of hours, and you can bet that most of the questions will be about Iran and the discussions that are due to get underway in Switzerland.
Tohid Asadi, you're in Bandar Abbas. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz to maritime traffic, mainly commercial maritime traffic, is a key part of this Memorandum of Understanding and is supposed to be a key part of the final deal going forward. What is actually happening in Hormuz right now?
Well, actually, let me pick up on what Alan earlier mentioned, the cloud of mistrust that is out there in Iran pertaining to any rapprochement towards the United States. But speaking of the situation here at the Strait of Hormuz, I think it's not a bad idea to give a mention to what happened in a local restaurant where I was for a lunch. And some people came, they were extremely happy about the new situation. And that is the public mood here in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz for many Iranians who were hopeful for this strait to be reopened, seeing the impact on local economies. But in addition to that, it goes without saying that when it comes to the global economy and the energy market at large, the impact is quite tangible as we witness the fluctuations when it comes to the oil prices. But speaking of the very situation here, we are expecting, following the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding by the Iranian president and the American president, what we are expecting basically is the reopening of the strait. But we know that it's not going to happen all of a sudden out of the blue, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to be gradual. But it's still, if we look at the rhetoric that we witness from the Iranian side, it is that of seriousness. And there are so many indications showing that the Iranians are quite steadfast to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But it's still, they are talking about the new regime, the new management, a new level of authority over the Strait of Hormuz, while we know that the truth of the matter on the ground is that there are too many ships and vessels being stranded here at the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm going to step aside so that Hamid can kindly show us. This is quite close to the Iranian territories, and you can see this is a local warfare, and then around that you can see a lot of ships and vessels, most of them belonging to the Iranians. But the more you move towards this strait, you can see more and more vessels and ships and oil tankers being stranded in this strait. And let me remind you, prior to the initiation of the war, we've got around 100 to 130 number, as of course estimated average number of 100 to 130 ships and vessels transiting through this geostrategically significant choke point. And all of a sudden, following the initiation of the war, we witnessed a pause, a huge pause. Iran is saying that it's trying its best to return the traffic situation back to the time before the initiation of the war. Meanwhile, they're saying that the new system, the new management is not going to be the same again. They are talking about, first they were talking about fees, transit fees and other sorts of fees, and now they are talking about service fees, service charges. We know that, at least from what we can hear, they don't have any plan to charge ships and vessels for this limited period of 60 days. But later on, they're saying that there is going to be a new mechanism coordinated with the Omani side in which there is a possibility for charges to be implemented.
Alan Fisher at the White House. During this 60-day interim period, well, 59 days now, during this interim period, before a final deal is potentially reached between the U.S. and Iran, what does the U.S. get out of this, the next 2 months?
Well, Donald Trump has made it clear on social media just in the last hour or so. He said that those who think he's made a weak deal, a bad deal with Iran, need to look at the stock market, that it's hit record highs, that oil prices are on the way down. And he says that anyone objects to this deal are either jealous, bad, or stupid people. So Donald Trump believes that it's the economic argument that wins here, and he made it when he was in France on Thursday as well. He didn't want to be Herbert Hoover, the president who sparked the great crash in 1929. He wanted to do something that helped the economy, and certainly there are supporters of Donald Trump who are very appreciative of what he's done, that he was in a war that was dragging on, was hitting everything in the US economy. Inflation was up, oil prices were up. Donald Trump himself has said it. It's like a tax on everything else. And people were struggling day to day. And so he took an action which brought this war to an end, which he believes will provide a wall to Iran getting to a nuclear weapon. And so many of his supporters say it was the right thing to do. Now, they'll argue about whether or not they should actually have got involved in the war in the first place. But he said coming to an end, bringing it to an end for the reasons that he did, was the right thing to do. And this proves, in their eyes, that Donald Trump is indeed an American first president.
Tohid Asadi, same question on your side. What does Iran get out of this memorandum of understanding? You know, in the absence of a final deal, in this interim period, what does Iran get?
Well, first and foremost, let's just remember that we're talking about not a final deal, but a memorandum of understanding. So basically, we are dealing with a past-dependent dynamism, and Iran is closely following that trajectory of diplomacy to gain the most out of this engagement. While, as I mentioned earlier, we're dealing with a mistrust here. First, the other day, we've got this spokesperson for the army saying that they are ready to return to the situation before the memorandum of understanding in case the other side does not fulfill its commitments. So that is a key word, whether or not the Americans are going to fulfill their commitments. And also we know that Iran, in a sense, needed this period as a sort of relief, or whatever you call it, in a situation of high tensions for a very long period of time. And also we know that Iran needs it when it comes to the economic situation of the country for those frozen assets to be released, and that is part and parcel of the deal. They're saying that between $5.6 to $25.6 billion are set to be gradually released, and we have to also keep in mind that we are talking about over 100 billion US dollars as frozen assets of the country in different international accounts, and the removal of sanctions, the primary and secondary sanctions that the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was talking about, is also critically important for the Iranians. All in all, we know that this is just a very first step, but a very first important step. But we are also waiting to see whether or not for the remaining sticking points, such as the nuclear dossier, in particular the stockpile of highly enriched uranium and other controversies, the two sides can sit down and resolve all these controversies within the trajectory of diplomacy, or it would be another round of escalation.
Al Jazeera's Tohid Asadi reporting from Bandar Abbas along Iran's south coast on the Strait of Hormuz, which of course has been central to how this war has unfolded. Thank you very much, Tohid, for your reporting.